In 1885, in a small Austrian foundry, a worker cracked open a lump of coal that had been buried for 60 million years. What fell out should not have existed. A perfectly formed iron cube, edges too clean, geometry too precise, surface too deliberate, lying inside rock that predated every known human civilization by tens of millions of years. The scientists who examined it had no explanation. The newspapers called it a miracle. The official record quietly reclassified it as a geological curiosity and moved on. But the object did not disappear. It is still there, and the question it raises has never truly been answered. How does a manufactured object end up inside a seam of ancient coal? And what does the answer tell us about the history we were never taught? If you want the history they buried literally, this channel is where you find it. Join us on Patreon for extended cuts, deep research files, and early access to everything we uncover. The link is in the description. The town of Schöndorf bei Vöcklerbruck sits in the upper Austrian countryside, about 40 kilometers southeast of Salzburg. In the late 19th century, it was industrial territory. Coal seams ran beneath the hills, and foundries processed raw lignite into fuel. It was unremarkable work. Men dug and hauled and cracked open stone by the ton. On an ordinary afternoon in 1885, a foundry worker named Isidor Braun was doing exactly that. He split a block of coal that had arrived from a local mine. Inside it, sitting in a cavity that fit the object almost perfectly, was a small iron cube. It did not belong there. Everyone in the room knew it immediately. Braun did not throw it aside. He set it on the workbench and stared at it. Something about its shape demanded that. The smoothness of the faces. The clean line running around the middle. The object measured roughly 67 millimeters across, 62 millimeters wide, and 47 millimeters tall. It weighed 785 grams. Its edges were not jagged or random. 4 of its 6 sides were flat and smooth. The top and bottom faces were slightly rounded, not from erosion, but by design. And running around the entire center of the object, cutting across all 4 flat sides in a perfectly level line, was a deep incision, a groove, carved with a precision that no natural geological process could produce. When Braun handed it to his supervisor, neither man had words for what they were holding. Word of the find spread quickly. The object was brought to the attention of local naturalists, and eventually examined formally by Friedrich Goelt, a mining expert and professor, who published his findings in 1,886 inches, a scientific journal. Goelt concluded that the object was not natural. I have to pause here for a second, because what I just described, that is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different cities, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence: discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It's in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. What followed was not. The object was placed in the Heimathaus Museum in Vöcklerbruck, where it sat for decades. It became a minor curiosity in European scientific literature, cited occasionally, referenced in early 20th century texts on unexplained phenomena, and largely ignored by mainstream academia. The official position, never stated outright but communicated clearly through silence, was that the object was probably a natural iron concretion, a nodule formed by mineral deposition, and that Goelt had simply been wrong. No one published a detailed rebuttal. No one ran a comprehensive analysis. The object was reclassified by consensus, without evidence, and the conversation was closed. That silence lasted nearly a century. In 1973, the Wolfsegg Iron, as the object had come to be called, after the broader region where it was found, was examined again by researchers at the Vienna Natural History Museum. They conducted a chemical analysis and found that the object was composed primarily of iron, with significant traces of nickel and very small amounts of sulfur. The nickel content was notable. Natural iron nodules do form in geological deposits, but they typically form in sedimentary rock under specific chemical conditions. The presence of nickel in this concentration was unusual, but not, the Vienna researchers argued, impossible for a natural formation. Their conclusion was cautious. It might be natural, It was not definitively artificial. Case closed, again. But there was a problem with that conclusion. Several problems, actually. The geometry of the object is not consistent with known natural iron concretions. Natural concretions form through a process of mineral deposition around a central nucleus. They grow outward in roughly spherical or oval shapes, following the path of least resistance through the surrounding material. They do not form flat faces. They do not develop precise right-angle edges. They do not produce a single clean groove running in a perfect horizontal line around their entire circumference. The groove alone is a structural impossibility for a natural formation. There is no geological mechanism that would carve a deliberate incision around the middle of a mineral nodule while leaving the surrounding surfaces intact and uniform. That groove is either the mark of a tool or the mark of something we do not yet understand. Either aren't. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. If you have not found it yet, go there now, because everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. What I can show you here is the surface. What is down there is everything underneath it. Pinned comment now, then come back. Bisecting the whole structure horizontally. The mathematical probability of all of that occurring naturally is not small. It is effectively zero. What every subsequent dismissal asked the world to accept is that it was not zero. They asked for that acceptance without providing the mechanism by which such a formation could occur. That is not a scientific conclusion. That is a request for faith. The coal that surrounded the object adds a layer of complexity the official record has never satisfactorily addressed. The lignite seams of Upper Austria are well dated. They formed during the Miocene epoch, the period that ran from roughly 5 million to 23 million years ago, with some seams in the region dating to the earlier Eocene and Oligocene periods, extending the range back to as far as 50 or 60 million years. These are not approximations. They are based on decades of stratigraphic analysis, fossil dating, and geological survey. When Isidor Braun cracked open that lump of coal, he was holding something formed during an era when there were no human beings on Earth. There were not even proto-human hominids. Modern humans as a species are, at most, 300,000 years old. The coal that encased the Wolfsegg Iron is older than that by a factor of at least 100. This is the fact that the reclassification as a natural nodule was designed to dissolve. If the object is natural, there is no mystery. It is geology. It is uninteresting. If the object is artificial, if it was made by a hand, by a tool, by an intelligence, then the entire timeline of human civilization collapses. Not metaphorically, literally. The story we tell about when humans first developed metalworking, when we first mastered iron, when we first built things with deliberate geometric form, all of it is built on the assumption that nothing like this existed before. The Wolfsegg Iron, if it is what it appears to be, is not an anomaly within the established record. It is evidence that the established record is wrong. In the early 1990s, a researcher named Hubert Matlianer conducted one of the more thorough physical examinations of the object. His analysis found the groove too uniform in depth and width to have formed through any known natural process, and the rounded surfaces too consistent in curvature to be geological accident. His findings were not published in a major scientific journal. They circulated in alternative research communities, which made them easy to dismiss. The dismissal was convenient. Whether it was accurate is a different question. The official response to the Wolfsegg Iron follows a pattern that appears repeatedly in the history of anomalous archaeological objects. The object is examined. It defies easy explanation. An explanation is proposed anyway, usually one that classifies the object as natural or misidentified. The explanation is accepted not because it is thoroughly proven, but because it closes the question. Then the object disappears into a storage room or a museum display case, labelled correctly in the catalogue and functionally forgotten. This is not science, it is administration. The difference matters enormously when the object in question is asking something that the official record cannot afford to answer. There is a broader context in which the Wolfsegg Iron sits, and it is a context that mainstream archaeology has spent a century working to keep invisible. The iron is not the only object of its kind. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, during the great age of industrial mining, when coal and rock were being extracted at a scale never seen before, reports of anomalous objects found inside ancient geological deposits appeared with striking regularity. A gold thread embedded in stone in Scotland in 1844. A nail found inside a block of Cretaceous sandstone the following year. A gold chain discovered inside a lump of coal in Illinois in 1891. A bronze bell found inside coal in West Virginia in 1944. An iron pot unearthed from coal in Oklahoma in 1912. None of these objects fit the official timeline. All of them were eventually dismissed, reclassified, or lost. All of them were reported by credible witnesses, miners, engineers, scientists, before the machinery of institutional consensus decided they could not be real. The pattern is not coincidence. Coincidence does not repeat across 7 decades, 4 countries, and a dozen independent witnesses. What repeats is suppression. What the Tartaria research community has been asking is not whether these objects are supernatural. It is whether they are evidence of a civilization or multiple civilizations that existed before the one we know, not in the distant mythological past. Literally, on this planet, before whatever cataclysm reset the human story and left us believing we were the first. The recovered ruins, the anomalous structures, the out-of-place artifacts, they are not independent curiosities. They are a pattern. They describe something, a world before our world. A record that was interrupted rather than begun. And the interruption was so complete that what survived was embedded in stone and sealed under the earth, waiting for someone with a hammer to crack it open. The geography of that interruption is significant. The coal seams of Upper Austria were formed during an era of dramatic geological and climatic change, a world defined by shifting seas, collapsing ecosystems, extinction events on a scale that rewrote entire continents. If a civilization existed during those eras, and the Wolfsegg Iron suggests that something did, then the forces that ended it were not subtle. They were the forces that fossilized forests and buried coastlines and sealed objects in rock so completely that 140 years of modern science cannot agree on what those objects are. Whatever was made, whatever was built, whatever was known, most of it is gone. What remains are fragments. Objects that survive by accident, sealed in deposits so old that the civilization that made them is not even a memory. It is a gap, an absence shaped like a question. The Wolfsegg Iron is still at the Heimathaus Museum in Vöcklabruck. There are photographs, there are measurements, there is the 1886 report by Friedrich Goelt in the historical record. The groove is visible in every image. The impossible geometry is there for anyone who wants to see it. What you will not find in any official scientific database is a satisfying explanation for why an iron object with a machined groove around its center was sitting inside coal that formed before the first human ever walked the earth. That explanation does not exist. What exists instead is the silence of a record that learned, long ago, that some questions are easier to bury than to answer. In 1885, Isidor Braun cracked open a piece of coal and held that silence in his hands. He knew only that the object did not belong there. He was right. 140 years later, the object is still there. The question it carries is still unanswered, and somewhere beneath the surface, in seams of rock not yet broken open, the rest of the record may still be waiting. The most unsettling thing about the Wolfsegg Iron is not the object itself, it is what it implies about everything else. If one iron cube can survive for 60 million years, sealed in coal, so can other things. Other evidence. The Earth is not a static archive. It is a geological system that buries and occasionally returns fragments of what it swallowed. We do not control the inventory. We only know what the mines have returned so far. And what they have returned, again and again, is the same answer. Someone was here before us. Something was built. Something was lost. The distance between what we admit to knowing and what the evidence says grows wider, with every object they quietly put back in the drawer. The question is not whether Isidor Braun found something real. He did. The question is whether we are willing to follow where it leads.